The time is 6:31, and this is the Police Planning Commission. Please note that the name of the committee was changed via unanimous vote of council at our last council meeting to reduce confusion by the public that the name signifies a predetermined outcome. So we have, let me just mute this. We have a few open action items that we'll start with before moving through our agenda for today. The first is that we have a new scope to look into, which is shared administrative cost exploration. So Councilman Feiner and I were invited by Chief Golden to attend a police staff meeting in late September. And during that meeting, one of the officers offered an excellent suggestion that I think this committee should consider. And I sent this to all of you, but just for the record and for the public. He thought Yardley Borough should explore opportunities to jointly bid on administrative costs with other boroughs. He specifically stated boroughs and not townships. Why boroughs? Boroughs tend to share more comparable structures, populations, and operating models. Boroughs typically maintain smaller, more compact police departments that rely on part-time or hybrid staffing like ours. So what does this mean? It could offer us significant cost savings by looking at software subscriptions with neighboring boroughs, antivirus, email services, bulk purchasing of firearms. So instead of when we need a new firearm for a new officer and going to purchase one, if another borough needs 3 and another borough needs 4, we go and purchase them at a bulk purchase price. Police vehicles, instead of purchasing one on our vehicle replacement schedule, we could purchase multiple in collaboration with other boroughs. And then insurance, because we know that larger pools of insured folks can lower risk and premium. So I'm looking for a house for that, meaning a subcommittee who would like to look into that. I also have another update. Pete Wermanjenko resigned today from the committee, and council will have to accept his resignation at our next meeting. But he was heading up current state along with Kim Siegel-Morris, so looking at where we are today with our police staffing models. So I've asked Corporal Clark to step into that position, who knows our current police office, police staffing models and stuff in our current state of our police department. Sorry, I'm struggling with my words tonight, better than Corporal Clark. And he said that sounds good to him. I think it might make sense for this administrative cost exploration to also sit there, given that it's looking at how our current office purchases things. Again, I think Corporal Clark knows that pretty well. Does anybody have a different idea for that one, or a different thought?
I got a couple of thoughts for you.
Sure.
One is that I think that there's administrative, which part of that is the co-stars, it already gives us kind of group purchasing power, but there may be other possibilities there. But then there's like 2 parts to this that I think extend further that are worth looking at. One is the idea, especially with IT, not just to buy together, but to actually to what extent can we partner with another department for them to essentially host what services we need and us just kind of be a terminal onto their system. So with that, can we remain an independent department and do that? So I think that's like a deeper question, because that could free up other aspects, and there's regulatory parts to that, like, do we need all of our data here in-house, or can it be stored in another department that meets the standards, and then, we don't need all these servers maybe, like that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. The other thing about insurance is what's complicated is who does the insurance company sign up? So there's like two entities, right? There's Yardley Borough and some other department. However, I do think that that's doable. And I think because it's still presenting itself as a group. And I think that it's a bit, what I'm trying to say is that somebody who knows insurance, starting with potentially a good broker, but somebody who knows insurance can figure out how that can be done, because I know that it can be done, but it's a bit complicated.
Yeah, no, those are all great.
But that's an avenue that could be, like with health insurance, for example, vehicle insurance, that could be substantial, and it really could be a small amount of work for a big payback year after year. So it's worth looking into. It's just that that one is, needs a little more work to be able to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, but so I think before we can get to that point, though, we have to take current state of like, how are we handling hosting and data storage? What are we paying for that? How are we handling buying? I know we use CoStars, but what does that look like? How would it differ? And then there is this legal or insurance broker question, like, is that all of this legal for us to explore? Would we be allowed to share costs in this way with another municipality? Would we be allowed for PII reasons? And I know there's a lot of data privacy laws within law enforcement. Would we be allowed to store our data somewhere else? So that's why I was thinking in terms of current state, where are we today? And then we can start looking at the possibilities of where we can go, unless anybody feels like it's completely misplaced with that subcommittee.
Can I offer a suggestion?
Sure.
As we evaluate current state, it might be helpful if it can be done categorically in the same categories that we use for the budget. So that we know that each area that drives cost has been evaluated for potential cost-saving efforts like this. And everything we evaluate falls into some area where we're spending money. Now, there may be things, I guess, that need to be evaluated that are not driving cost, and I don't want to preclude that, but at least the things that do drive cost, let's try to categorize that way.
That makes sense to me. Okay, so we'll leave it with your subcommittee for now for the current state, and then we'll go from there and try to share notes with the finance committee to make sure you're lining up with our current budget line items. I'm going to ask tonight if anybody would be willing to start taking meeting notes so that we can just have informal minutes. We're not a voting body, so we don't need to formally approve them, but just so we have notes and action items that can be sent out. I can do that from our last meeting by rewatching the meeting. I have not done that yet, but I'm happy to do that for our last meeting. But is anybody interested in doing that going forward?
I can do it if you give me a pen.
Old school.
It's a nice pen, too. All right, and then in terms of filling Pete Wermanjenko's spot, that'll be up to council how they want to handle that, so we don't need to touch on that tonight. All right, moving into the subcommittee scope report. So tonight we're going to have everyone provide an update on what they've been looking at and what their process is going to be going forward for data collection. Starting with benchmarking, which is Rich Wayne and Ori Feiner.
Yeah, so we're going to take a broader view. We talked a lot about the micro view, the police budget, and how they're doing and how they're staffed. And we decided to look at what other boroughs in Bucks County, how they finance their police coverage and how they do it. And doing this, I found some interesting findings.
Next.
Okay. All right, so there's 54 municipalities in Bucks County. As Ms. Thompson said, we are a borough. It's a little bit different than a township. We tend to have a connected downtown and a denser police force. So I'm focusing on the 23 boroughs in Bucks County. Of the 23 boroughs in Bucks County, 12 have full-time independent police force, 11 have either contracted or regional police coverage, and that's different, and I'll talk about it in a little bit. 20 of the 23 have a local income tax in addition to a property tax to fund their operations. Only 3 boroughs have no local income tax, and that would be Yardley, Bristol Borough, and Langhorne Manor. Of those 3, only 2 have their own independent full-time police force. Next. And that would be Yardley and Bristol boroughs. And if you can see, Bristol is much larger than us, right? Their total value of their tax base is, roughly twice ours. Their population is 4 times ours. They have a much higher general fund than we do to fund their force. We have a general fund of about 26 mils. They have the max, the legal max of 35. The max is 30, but you can get another 5 if you go to court and ask for it. So what does Bristol Borough get with that high 35 mils? They have 10 full-time officers, 5 part-time officers, and a full-time code enforcement officer, and associated costs with those folks. Looking at boroughs that are more like Yardley, there are 2 that are very similar to Yardley, New Britain Borough and Sellersville Borough. They have about the same value as us. I apologize for using 2022. I couldn't get anything more recent. I'm still working on that. Their populations are not that far from ours. And what's interesting is they both have an EIT, which is a local income tax, and they do not have their own police force. New Britain Borough is served by the regional Central Bucks Regional Police Department that serves 3 boroughs. And Sellersville Borough pays Percy Borough for their police coverage. Now, what's interesting is Sellersville used to be part of the Penridge Regional and decided at some point to shift to paying their neighbor for police coverage. And most recently, about 5 years ago, I found the Sellersville budget. They were paying about $1 million to Percy for police coverage. So really, there's 3 approaches to financing the police broadly. You either mix in local income tax with your property tax, which is what 87% of the boroughs in Bucks County do, or you rely only on a property tax and have a full-time force like we in Bristol do, or you only have a property tax and you outsource coverage, which is what Langhorne Manor does. I believe Langhorne Manor, their officers only serve during the daytime, and they have the state police covered rest. It should be noted that state police is free, but the call times can be lengthy.
Is it free?
Yes. There's legislation that's been proposed to make towns pay for it that use it. It'd be like $230 per resident, I believe. As a rate, but it has not passed. It's been proposed every year.
Thanks.
And it hasn't passed. My recommendation to the committee is in the near term, we don't have to make huge decisions in the near term. We just, as we go along, we emulate Bristol. And whatever the market rate is for our full-time force, we pay and we adjust our general millage. Long term, because we have half the total tax value of Bristol, at some point, we're going to have to make the decision. We're either going to have to reduce coverage or adopt an EIT. I don't think a regional is really going to open itself to us because regional works when you have multiple towns that are roughly equal in size and border each other, and we don't have that here. So that is my take on it. I'm sure, it's a lot to take in. That's about it. Just what other boroughs are doing.
Thank you. Questions from the table on this presentation and maybe any other benchmarking that we are interested in looking at this time? Yes, sorry.
So, Rich, thank you. You and I were both involved in various fashions when the EIT discussion came up last time. I think it would be interesting if we could get an assessment somehow, I don't know how we do it, of what percentage of the borough currently pays an EIT, because I'm guessing it's probably more than the last time we
I agree.
reviewed this. And let's just say, I'm completely making up a number, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of an EIT, but I'm just saying, if last time it was 40%, again, a totally made-up number, this time, probably 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years later, it could be 85%. And if it is, that may just change the tone of the conversation.
Agreed, and a number, at least 5 boroughs adopted it since we last considered it.
Yeah, I don't know how we I mean, I know we talked about in the past about how we can judge how many of our residents pay it. I know we have better communication now, kind of through email blasts and things like that than we did then, but it would be an interesting number to know right now.
Right.
I think that people, just to clarify, that people maybe don't know that if you pay an EIT to another municipality.
Yeah, so if you,
You're already paying it, basically. So
You're already paying
it
it,
would
right.
no longer go to Newtown, it would just come here, but you'd be paying the
Sure.
city.
So I work in Newtown officially. I pay an EIT. My money goes to Newtown Township. If Yardley Borough incorporated an EIT, the money that I pay to Newtown would just come, I would just pay it to Yardley. I wouldn't double pay or anything like that. Yeah.
So it also is true for Philadelphia. Quite a few of our residents work in Philadelphia, and they pay the city wage tax.
Yeah. So I mean, Paula, you may know how we could figure out that number.
Yeah, Keystone Collection Services can give us that. Philadelphia wage tax stays in Philadelphia. We could never, ever, ever touch Philadelphia wage tax.
There was, I
Never
think,
change that.
there was some discussion, I don't know where it went, but there was just some discussion of trying to find like a happy medium, because a lot of places around Philadelphia are pretty, it's been going on for a long time, but what I read, the last thing I read about it was actually looked like it had been stepping forward because there was some kind of compromise brewing. So that may change, it may change at some point. But the main point to understand is that's the question. And I think if we really wanted to study that to understand it, that would be like a kind of longer term thing where we
Sure.
actually
Right.
like I could see people actually taking a period of time and asking residents to come in and basically, kind of share whatever they're comfortable sharing and kind of get what their situation would be like under an EIT versus the current plan, so people even know what that is. None of us really know. We're kind of flying blind. We have ideas, we don't really know.
But again, we had a very vociferous debate last time throughout the community. But if that has changed over 6 or 7 years to now where, again, I'll make up a number, 85 or 90% are already paying it, it may just be a different conversation this time.
Correct.
May I offer a suggestion on that conversation also? The number you need, I think, is not percentage of residents, it's percentage of dollars. Because every resident is not going to have the same income and contribute the same amount of money as for 1% of their income.
For budgeting purposes, but in terms of, or impact to the family of if they would need to start paying a new tax or not, it would be percentage of house.
Absolutely. So
I think both numbers are important, yeah.
quite reasonable to have that also. But if you want to know how much it would bring in against the budget,
Yeah, I apologize. I was talking
That's
more
specific,
of
yeah.
who currently pays it and who does not in the borough to see if what that path would be.
And just like this is sort of a tangent. I think we should get back to the police and basically say, okay, well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Keeping in mind that regardless of the police, there are other pressures coming, such as the fire department and having to pay for those services at some point down the line. So there are pressures coming in, plus their usual inflation. So no matter what we do, that 35, whatever that limit is 35? 30 to then 35, it's right around the corner. And that's something that this community is going to have to deal with.
Paula, would Keystone charge us to find that information?
I can call them tomorrow and they'll start the data. I want to say it was over 700,000 when I looked into it like 3 years ago, of monies that
Would come
they
in
are,
from-
that they are collecting from borough residents that goes elsewhere. But I will get a firm number.
And I guess one more thing I should point out for this committee that is relevant to the police is that the proposed tax increase for next year takes into account new police contracts. So we would be able to sustain in near term what Rich is talking about with following the Bristol model.
Okay, anything else, Mr. Wayne, Mr. Finer, on benchmarking?
No.
Okay, we'll move to Dan Moan and Chris Harding on shared services assessment.
So I shared a document with the group this past week, which basically outlines the approach and questions that I'm going to take. As I go through it, I'll note where I've changed the document based upon feedback, and then any other additional items that someone would want to add, feel free to speak up and do so. So our proposed action plan is that we're going to explore two general options for the police force with a variance within each option. And the two options are complete outsourcing of the police department and partial outsourcing of the police department. Within those two main options, we want to consider variations on that. I originally had three, but I've added one more based on input that I got. So it would be state police, lower Makefield, upper Makefield, and any additional municipality within a 15-mile radius who we can find who is interested would be the target to talk to. Questions so far?
Suggestion of another
Yeah.
municipality. So I spoke to somebody from Middletown that was pretty high up there several months ago. And I learned of the model where we could have like a Yardley Borough Police would basically be a substation. But they would supply all of their people, or our people would be hired by them, however that works. And then all the infrastructure would be theirs. They might be interested in bidding so they can compare that, for the purposes of this research.
Well, we have Chris, so we can reach out and find out if there's any interest at all in discussing.
I think they'd fall in the 15-mile
Yeah.
radius.
Yeah, and again, because they wouldn't be patrolling from there.
Right.
They'd be here, which I'll bring that point up in your next point. 'cause
Yeah.
we'll talk about that.
Yep. Any additional comments, suggestions? All right. And then within those variances, I put a list of questions. And here are the questions that I have generally for all of the options. How often would an officer be in the borough? Would officers patrol the borough? What would be the expected response times what would the expected response time be for an officer to get to the borough? What are the different levels of service available? Criminal response only, patrols, medical. How would special events held in the borough work? What would be the cost of that? Would it be additional to whatever the coverage is? And how would emergency management events work if there was some type of flooding? Whether that would be an additional cost or how that would work. Any thoughts or questions for generally to all of the different options that we said?
I don't know if it's an addition or a change or not.
Yeah.
It's become clear as I look at the budget that there's a set of tasks that our officers do, which are, for lack of a better word, policing tasks, and then there's a set of tasks which are sort of administrative tasks. You might want to ask the question about how they do those things and if they're done differently or the same, if they have sort of a back office infrastructure, which we don't have the critical mass to have. It just might be helpful to understand. I also don't know if there's other kinds of services that are distinct that different organizations might have, like, I don't know if patrolling services are different from detective services, or, I mean, a police officer would know better what categories of work there are, but there may be categories that should be inquired about.
I think there are like crash investigation units and detective units and things like that, which we could absolutely include in our research.
Thank you. Any additional on the general questions?
No, that's.
And then on the complete outsourcing, I had an additional question, which is what would be the cost of coverage? And if there are different service levels for that coverage, patrolling versus just response. And then on the partial outsourcing side for everyone, obviously, is partial outsourcing available for overnight, 8-hour, 12-hour shift? And what would be the cost for those coverages based upon what we were looking at?
So is this an opportunity I can?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is so just, I go and say this at 100%, I believe we should maintain our local police, but the exercise is useful. But for the exercise to really make sense and be a useful number, what I learned, which I'm not surprised at, but in talking to now well over 100 people. I don't know how many. And I think it echoes throughout other people as well, is that the value of that like 1 minute or less response time that a lot of people get, your kid's choking and you call up and they're there or whatever happens. I've heard a lot of stories that I didn't know I had it happen to me. And I think this community is very unlikely to want to lose that. So with that said, I think maybe to make your job simpler, maybe it's worth like taking state police off the table, because my understanding the response time is like 45 minutes or something like that. I just don't think anyone would tolerate that even for free. It's like, there's some minimum standard.
Or you make that your top metric.
Well, I think maybe, since we do have one borough that Rich pointed out, which is using the state police partially, at least have an initial conversation with them as to what they're finding with their coverage.
Yeah.
I can do that.
So,
Yeah, Rich?
so that's, and in terms of, though, outsourcing, I think what's confusing is if you outsource to a neighboring municipality and they kind of, let's say they have, 10, 12, 15 active, patrol at any given time. You can sort of almost like throw Yardley in the mix there. And what happens then is that the residents pay the price because now a 1 minute response time became 10 or 15-minute response time. And I also don't think that this community would support that. So maybe the question should be asked with outsourcing, these are the options we want. We want the throw us into the mix. We want guaranteed a patrol car inside borough borders at all times. Or, like they should give us a few levels. That way, when you present it, we understand that we're not just looking at outsourcing, we're looking at reduction in police service.
Yeah, I was trying to get at that with the expected response times, how often an officer would be in the borough, because, those are the type of questions that I think will expose what you're talking about. They could say, I would imagine, they could say, well, you'll just be another region in our group and we'll patrol your region like we patrol every other region, or, the answer may be different, but I'll be sure to be clear on the different service levels, which is important, I think.
Yeah, and the metric I think that to use for that is response time. The problem with it is you get promised one response time, you get another.
Yeah.
But I think that the metric you could use is, would they guarantee a police vehicle with at least one, probably two, but at least one inside the borough borders? That's one thing. The second is, we have to get the metric. We could probably get that pretty easily. How much traffic patrol do we do here? Because that's a big issue to people, the speeding and all that. And you would want to get, okay, to maintain that service level that we have now of speed patrol, stop sign, et cetera, that we currently do, that should be on there. And then the third would be how much like walking around street patrol do we do? And so you could say, okay, for the equivalent, more or less equivalent to what we get, this is the cost. For the other one, which was whatever version, that's the cost. And, I think that would be, we could really look at that number. It would make sense.
I agree.
But I think also, going back to benchmarking, looking at what the actuals are for municipalities with these models, so that we're not just relying on a number that somebody puts in a proposal, but actual real-life situations, because you're right, somebody's going to say, we'll be there in 2 minutes, but it'll really be 15, which makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Is that something benchmarking can try to pull? So average response times for the 3 different scenarios that you outlined tonight.
Well, they're in the options that Dan is looking at, but, I can call some. When I call Langhorne Manor, I'm gonna ask them.
You mean
how-
for the borough?
Well, yeah,
current response times for
instead
the
of
borough.
asking people to submit their proposed responses to these questions, we would look at what the actuals are for the municipalities who are using that model, but unless we don't feel like that's going to be useful data.
I'll get a couple.
Okay.
It might be, my intention is not to submit questions to people, it's to interview
Okay.
and have conversations with. And these are just kind of the guiding questions. So it is important that if there's specifics that you're interested in, as was just voiced, that we have those as well, for sure.
Okay, got it.
Anything else on all questions? And then I broke down state police, upper Makefield, lower Makefield, specific questions for the state police. What's the closest barracks? What local areas do the state police provide service to currently? Which I think Rich has answered in his portion as well. And then for upper Makefield and for lower Makefield, would posting someone at the Yardley Borough Police Station be an option for that level of service that we're looking for? So our plan is to speak with each of these areas, and hopefully they will be willing to speak with us and drill down on some of the details, which we will then report back. Anything to add, Chris?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, back to the agenda. Next up, we have community outreach, which I sit on. Corporal Clark is also sitting on it, but he's moving over to current state assessment. I just think it's a good time now that we take a pulse poll of Yardley Borough on how they're feeling, on current coverage, on financial pressures on our police force, and then have a comment section. Obviously, that's going to be a lot to wade through in terms of data, but the idea would be we would provide some information about our proposed process, where we are in the process, where we're going, get their feedback, try to get a response rate of at least 50% through email engagement, but also if we have to go out to doors, I'm happy to do that. And then mid-process, we would take another one, end of process, before any final decisions by council are made, we would take the final. I haven't drafted those questions yet. They would ultimately be up to council to vote on the questions we're going to send out, but does that sound like a reasonable plan in terms of community engagement? I just feel like at this point, the community is wanting something from the committee. What's going on? What are we looking at? What's the timeline? What's really being considered? So I think the tricky part there is going to be crafting something that's unbiased and clear, but I'm happy to take first pass at that.
Are you looking to communicate the information, or are you looking to find out what the community's thoughts are?
I think it would have to be separate. So the survey needs to be sent out without any information attached to
So
it.
this is just a communication out to the community?
A communication out,
Okay.
that the committee was formed, here's who's on it, here's what we're looking at, here's when our next meeting is. We can include some notes from our past meetings, but separately, a pulse poll on how the community is feeling on what we're paying for police and our current coverage and what's being considered.
And so you're putting together for the first one to start with, or you're doing both?
Well, I can put together both, but I think the communication should go out, a couple weeks before the survey.
Yeah, I would just make sure that people have space to use free,
Free response.
it's a small enough community that I'd like to read through what people say, not just have the boxes checked. That's good too, but we could do both.
And Corporal Clark, you were mentioning some, or maybe it wasn't you, it was someone else at the staff meeting, I thought it was you though, about when we are collecting input from the public, just saying do we support or do we not support the police? Everyone's going to say we support the police, but drilling down more into specifics on what they want to keep about our current coverage, what's really important to them about our current service.
Yeah, I don't recall saying that specifically, but I mean, I think, yeah, that would be worthwhile to know, for sure.
Okay, sounds good, thank you. All right, yes.
Yeah, I'd also like this, in the survey one, a little bit more probing questions. Along the lines of, everyone views what they have, through the, hey, we're a small town lens, right? But I would like the questions to be specific enough that we're really, the community is really thinking through the answers of whether it's just what we perceive that we have as a small town, or whether it's, what are your, practical experiences with the local police,
Yeah,
right?
practical.
You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I'd be interested in that.
Absolutely. Yep. That makes sense. Thank you.
Is that something that maybe could be like a draft and we could add to it if we feel like if we're not on the outreach part of the
Oh, yeah,
committee? maybe we'll
absolutely,
just-
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, we would want to
That
all
way,
kind of be
those
happy
kinds
with
of
it. Not that
thoughts
I know
can
that
be
it's possible that we're all completely happy with it, but get to a
Yeah.
point where we feel all comfortable with it.
An opportunity for input is nice.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, financial review, 10 minutes here, and then we'll move on to, we don't have anyone here tonight from the current police department eval, so then we'll move into public comment after that.
Okay, can I get slides, please? Financial Analysis Subcommittees, myself and Paula, with absolutely crucial help from Don. Thank you for that. Today is not really intended to be an output conversation so much as an initial framework and a process check, and then ultimately, of course, we'll use this information to compare alternatives. Next slide, please. We started with this, and I've summarized a 2-page document, which the whole committee has. Caroline sent it out at the very beginning of some of the questions that were posed. There were a lot of questions posed. We'll try to address some of those today, and some will need to be checked later. Next slide, please. So from a process perspective, the intent right now is to focus on the process. The financial analysis will follow. It's premature, again, for takeaway of results. There are multiple facts and multiple numbers that still require verification. So I don't want anyone to leave this evening thinking this was the answer. This is more of an invitation to get the correct facts and correct numbers, although I do have things in sort of all the slots. There are a bunch of forward-looking assumptions. Anytime you're planning for the future, of course, you have to make assumptions about the future. My suggestion is that we manage that by sensitivity analysis, and that the committee should agree on sort of a range of assumptions that we'll use rather than picking any one person's opinion about sort of what the future might look like. And then at the end of the day, of course, this is most useful for comparing to alternative structures, and it may have some value sort of as a sidebar for long-range budget planning. Next slide, please. So from the early information gathering perspective, I want to share some of the facts that I've sort of gotten so far. This is from the collective bargaining agreement between the borough and the police force. The total compensation elements for personnel, of course, include the schedule salaries, but it's not just the salary. There's a bunch of other elements that cost the borough money. Holiday pay at 1.5, festive at ×2, overtime at 1.5, court time, department and borough functions, a designated officer in charge time, and other things. There's PTO time, including vacation, varying in amount based on tenure, personal time, sick time. There's an accrued liability the borough has for terminal leave, up to 150 days for each individual. Some of the biggest items are medical. Unlike people in, my experience at least, in most private organizations, the borough pays 98% of premiums, employee contribution is 2%. The borough pays 100% of deductibles and 50% of co-pays that are left after the insurance coverage, and there's no employee cost at all for vision and dental. So the cost of medical is significant. We provide life insurance, although, this is personal opinion, not a lot of life insurance at $100,000. But we also provide disability, and that applies both for on-duty and off-duty. Pension is a major budget item. The pension services for police in the CBA vest at 12 years, and pension can be taken at 20 years regardless of age, with the maximum benefit at 25 years of service and age 50. And of course, the borough also pays employer tax. Now, the employee does not receive that benefit directly, except in the context of, Social Security in the future, unlike the other items. So collectively, the non-salary compensation costs are probably adding what I would estimate, pending verification, as I said before, of the numbers, what I would estimate to be about 35 to 40% on top of the salaries that everybody has seen in the salary schedule. And I've estimated that at about 40% in 2025, but based on projected budget, for future years, it looks like it might be more like 35%. So it's non-trivial, and numerically, the biggest items are the pension, the medical, the tax, and then everything else is sort of much smaller following after that. Next slide, please. So a couple of other things that have come out in information gathering, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We should be clear that today our Yardley officer time is not entirely allocated to direct policing because we don't have the critical mass to have a back office infrastructure to support our officers. So as I understand from Chief Golden, and I think this is more of a guesstimate than something that can be documented, about 80% of time is estimated to be spent on policing and about 20% on administrative tasks for officers today. Other costs that are relevant to our police department include capital expenditures. So our CapEx includes 5 police vehicles, is my understanding, with a planned new purchase every 2 years. So that would be a cycle of 10 years for each vehicle. Historical cost was $65,000 for the vehicle plus the outfitting for police use. The police radio system is a non-trivial cost. I'm not clear yet if that's managed as a capital expense or just as expense. And then police facility infrastructure was one of the things we were asked to look at. It doesn't seem like there's going to be much change in the borough cost, whether we maintain police facilities or not, because they don't really have distinct facilities. Although an observation was made that there's an annex, which I'm not familiar with directly, but so that may be something that may or may not be something that could be removed from ongoing borough expenses. So more work can be done to investigate whether there's anything there. There are some other expenses, police liability, police automobile insurance, workers' comp, a whole variety of other things I've mentioned there, including maintenance, repair, and operation of the vehicle's radio system and so forth. With regard to medical, I did some brief research for 2026. ACA insurers are commonly reporting that the underlying cost of health care medical trend is going to increase at around 8%. It was 7% for 2025. It was 6% for 2024. The median premium increase they're requesting is 18% for next year in the ACA plans, but that probably is a one-time thing related to policy changes this year. I reviewed a number of what I would describe as quality sources, the Kaiser Family Foundation, Medicare, Health and Human Services, for data about the inflation rate we might expect in medical expense going forward. And it appears that they're suggesting around 7% for employer-sponsored plans, although the Mercer survey suggested around 9%. You'll see that in my tentative, preliminary planning, I've just used 8% inflation rate for medical. The reason I'm belaboring this a little bit is because it's one of the big cost drivers. Yardley Borough, I understood, was estimated to have approximately 1,144 households and approximately 2,500 residents. And the service call volume, which was also asked about, ranged between 6,200 and 7,800 between 2020 and 2024. The year-to-date for 2025, for the first 3 quarters of the year through September, was 7,028, which implies 9,370 if you just annualize linearly. However, I'm also advised that the metric for what defines a call might be different this year than in previous years. So it might be apples to oranges comparison for prior years. Go to the next slide, please.
I just to say one thing about service call volume, and this is kind of just for, it's important for the committee to be aware of this, is that we report our numbers a little bit differently here. I dug into this for a while, and it's fine. Everybody has their own systems, no problem. But the thing to understand is that those are not 100%. Only about half of those, roughly, are calls where people call for service. The other half are like proactive service checks on businesses, that kind of thing. So, because often you'll look at statistics of another borough,
Yeah.
and that number will be the actual people who have called for police. So that's the disparity, in case you look at that, and it's just important.
You know, from a budget perspective, the reason I'm reporting this is because we were asked specifically to talk about cost per call. If calls are in fact heterogeneous, and what constitutes a call might be something that's resource intensive or not resource intensive, these probably should be broken down.
Correct.
I don't know what kind of data the police team keeps right now, or how they categorize, or if these are categorized. But I'm happy
They have it.
to use that data, and yes, it would be helpful to use comparisons for benchmarking by category if possible. Some preliminary analysis outputs, subject to all the caveats that I articulated previously. For 2025, our police-specific expense estimated annual, year isn't over yet, and so we don't know the true numbers yet, is a hair over $1 million. 2024 was, the number that's there, similar. Preliminary estimate for 2026, and I say that, there's no approved budget yet for 2026, nor do we have the final collective bargaining agreement. So, you take that with grain of salt, is higher at a little under 1.2 million. This suggests on a per household or per person basis, the estimated 2025 cost is about $880 for a household and $402 for a person. And you can see I've estimated what that compares to for 2024 or for next year in 2026. So, a little over 1,000 and a little over 470 for households and people, respectively. The total cost per call, with the important caveats that Yuri pointed out about calls are not all the same. But just using the raw numbers and projecting through the end of the year from the first 3 quarters suggests a cost of a little over $100 per call using the 2025 call definition, which compares to about $130 for 2024. And there are several reasons for that. With regard to the average cost per officer FTE, so I want to be clear, this is not the cost of any particular human being. This is the cost of a full-time equivalent employee. The average, sort of just the numerical average in 2025 is going to be a little over $98,000. It was a little bit of an odd year. I am told that, I can assume that for this year, sort of on average, we had chief plus 4 full-time, plus 7 part-time, and I assumed at 50% time for a part-time, which may or may not be true, which would add up to a total of 8.5 FTEs, 59% of which were full-time. So with the total labor cost assumed of a hair under $840,000, that's how you get to the average cost per FTE. For 2026, I assumed a chief plus 5 full-time plus 12 part-time at 50%. And again, I'm happy to change those things if those are not right. That's just what I had been advised was desired. That implies 12 FTEs. And if I use our preliminary, again, not approved budget against those FTEs, then it would suggest a possible 2026 cost per FTE of about, a little over $98,000. That appears slightly lower, but that's not because individuals are less expensive. It's because the mix is different. And a full-time person is meaningfully more expensive than a part-time person, and the percentage of the work from part-time people is estimated to be higher in 2026 than in 2025. So it's the mix rather than the cost per person that's driving the fact that it stays similar despite the total budget going up. Last slide, and I'm not going to try to walk through all this. I have 2 additional slides which people can review sort of up on their own time. But this is sort of the framework sort of behind some of the analysis. And what I want to highlight here is that there are a lot of assumptions, especially that go into projecting forward in time. And My hope is that we can be completely explicit, clear about what assumptions are being made so that everyone can know exactly what they are. And that, again, as I said at the very beginning, we can do sensitivity analysis around the assumptions so that if, the assumptions about the future turn out to be a little bit high, a little bit low, we sort of have a reasonable range, and the truth ends up being somewhere in that range. Again, though, the most important numerical costs are the costs related to people, driven especially by not just salaries and total compensation, but also by medical and the other things I mentioned. And then the other capital expenses, vehicles, radios, and things like that I mentioned before. Last slide is just the other half of this, because there's more lines than you can fit on one slide. And that's where you see the total estimated expense by 2030 winds up being a little over 1.5 million, using some of the rates of inflation that I've annotated on individual lines. And there's not time to discuss all that right now, but I want to invite feedback. I want to invite other opinions about rates of inflation that we may want to assume in different kinds of expenses. The cost of vehicle inflation rate may be different than the cost of medical insurance or disability insurance. And those assumptions could drive our expectations for what this cost is going to be over the next 5 years.
So thank you so much, Rami. This is super helpful to ground us in the actuals and also to project forward. I'm going to ask that folks send their feedback after they've digested this to Rami after the fact, since we only have 7 minutes until the council meeting starts, and I'd love to hear from the public. And also utilize this as a resource into your subcommittees to compare. What do we have? What are we projecting out to what are we considering? I think that's where this data is super helpful. All right, sorry to remove your ability to talk amongst the committee about this, but I'll open up to public comment. Please come forward, state your name and whether or not you're a borough resident. Keep your public comment brief. You can always follow up with us by email, send to Paula, she'll forward to the committee, or comment during public comment at the council meeting if we don't have enough time during this meeting for you. Public comment. All right, well, I would like to thank everybody who has reached out to the committee so far and sent us your thoughts. They have been received and appreciated. Anything else? Anybody unclear on next steps or action items before our next meeting? All right, thank you. We can take 5 before our council meeting. Thank you so much, everyone.